I surely can spin you a tale about the secrets held deep in the clay of Harmony Creek. It's a story about how the truth, like kudzu vine in the summertime, just can't stay buried, no matter how much dirt you pile on it. Settle on back now and let me tell you about Lily, and the man she thought was her daddy, and the man the whole town thought was a saint. It all started when George, bless his honest, quiet heart, passed on. Lily felt like a boat cut loose from its anchor, drifting on a sea of grief, and the only comfort she found was in rummaging through his old things. She was looking for memories, little bits of him she could hold tight, but what she found was something altogether different. Tucked away under a pile of old tax receipts, in a lockbox George never spoke of, was a faded envelope. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd put in a safe. It was just plain paper, but the weight of it in her hand felt heavy as a cinder block. It was meant for Sarah, her mama, but Lily, well, she was George's daughter, or so she thought, and curiosity, they say, killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. She had to know what George had kept hidden all these years, tucked away from the sun and the light. It smelled of old paper and pine, a scent that tasted like the very dust of their past. And when she opened it, the world as Lily knew it began to crumble right around her feet. The shock was immediate and chilling, like stepping barefoot onto cold linoleum in the middle of the night, knowing you weren't alone in the house. This was no loving note from George to Sarah. No. It was written in a hand Lily didn't recognize, elegant and looping, and the words were short, too short, like they'd been carved out of stone rather than written on paper. The paper inside was thin as a promise, and the ink had bled just a little, like tears on the page. Lily unfolded it slow, her breath catching in her throat, feeling that familiar, sickening pull of a mystery that ought to be left alone. The letter spoke of a meeting, down by the creek, a place where young folks went when they wanted to talk about things they couldn't speak of in town. But it wasn't the place that chilled her soul to the core. It was the words. The secret can't hold forever, Sarah. He's growing, and the more I see of him, the harder it is to just stand here and smile like I don't know the truth. You know I love you, and I love her too. We both made our choices, but I see my eyes in her, and it breaks me every time. The him and her were plain enough, George and Lily, but the sheer agony pouring off the page, the deep regret and the burning, forbidden love, it was a whole new story. Lily sank onto George's old rocking chair, the one that creaked just right, but the comfort was gone now, replaced by a terrible, buzzing noise in her ears. Who was this man, seeing his eyes in her face, claiming her as his own, yet leaving her to be raised by George, the kindest man that ever walked the path? She flipped the letter over and over, desperately searching for a clue, a last name, a place, anything to give her footing in this sudden quicksand. And that's when she saw the signature, scrawled small and hurried at the bottom. Just a single, sharp name that echoed through the small town of Harmony Creek like the church bells on Sunday morning. The name, simple and stark, was James. Just James. In a small town like Harmony Creek, where everybody knew everybody's business down to the color of their kitchen curtains, there was only one James who mattered. There was only one James who held such a position of respect, whose words were gospel truth and whose name was spoken with reverence, like a prayer whispered on a cool morning breeze. That name belonged to Reverend James, the man who stood in the pulpit every Sunday, the man whose hands had confirmed Lily when she was a girl, the man who had preached George's funeral just 3 weeks ago. Reverend James. Lily felt the blood rush out of her head, leaving her light and dizzy, and she had to clutch the arm of the chair just to keep from falling out of George's comforting orbit and right into the cold, hard reality of the letter. Could it be? Could the spiritual father of Harmony Creek, the rock of the entire community, be her biological father? It was a scandal so big, so monstrous, it threatened to swallow up the whole town like a sudden sinkhole. The man who spoke of heaven and hell every week, the man whose wife, Martha, was the epitome of church lady goodness, was tangled up with her mother, Sarah, in a secret that had lived for 30 years. The irony was bitter as unsweetened coffee. He'd taught her about sin, but he was drowning in a secret sin of his own, a sin that had left its shadow right on Lily's own face, in the shape of her eyes and the set of her jaw. She thought about his solemn face at the funeral, his comforting words to Sarah, his hand resting on Lily's shoulder, and a wave of nausea hit her. Every kind word, every blessing, every peaceful moment she'd ever felt in that church now tasted like a deliberate lie, a perfect performance put on for a crowd of trusting souls. Lily couldn't hold that secret. It was too big for her small chest, a pressure cooker set to blow. She knew she had to talk to Sarah, her mama, but the thought of it made her hands tremble. Sarah had always been a nervous woman, prone to sudden tears and quiet spells, and Lily now understood why. She'd been living with this shadow for decades, raising another man's child while the real father stood just across the street, offering salvation and tea sandwiches. Lily walked the floor, pacing out the long years of lies, the heavy silence George had carried, and the quiet sacrifices they had all made for the sake of appearances. In the South, appearances aren't just polite. They're everything. They are the mortar that holds the community together, and Sarah had built her life's house on a shaky foundation of public grace and private deceit. Lily tucked the letter back into the box, locking away the evidence, but the words were already etched into her memory, burning like acid. She rehearsed the conversation in her head, trying to find a way to approach her mother without shattering her completely. "Mama, I found George's box," was too blunt. "Mama, what do you know about Reverend James?" was too much of a giveaway. She needed a gentle way in, a southern way, a way that started with a cup of sweet tea and ended with the truth laid bare, ugly and painful as it was. But no matter how she tried to soften the blow, the end result was the same. A confession, an admission of guilt, and the final, crushing understanding that her whole life was a carefully constructed fiction. She knew Sarah would weep. She knew Sarah would try to deny it. But Lily was George's daughter in spirit, and George was a man who prized the truth, even when it hurt. And Lily needed the whole, messy truth now, before the secret started to eat her alive from the inside out. The inevitable confrontation happened the very next day, right after lunch, when the afternoon sun was high and unforgiving, casting harsh shadows on everything. Sarah was out on the porch, shelling peas, humming a hymn, an old, familiar scene that now seemed deeply, horribly wrong. Lily didn't start with the tea. She went straight to the heart of the matter, placing the small wooden box on the table right between them. "Mama," Lily said, her voice shaking like a leaf caught in a strong breeze. "George kept this hidden. And there's a letter inside signed James." Sarah's hands froze over the bowl of peas, and the humming stopped dead in her throat. The color drained out of her face until she was whiter than the apron she wore, and the peas tumbled out of their shells, rolling across the porch boards like little green eyes watching the disaster unfold. "Lily, put that away. That's old history, dusty things George kept. Nothing for you to worry your head about," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, but her eyes held a terror Lily had never seen before. Sarah quickly tried to gather the rolling peas, a frantic, useless effort to regain control, but Lily didn't let her. "It's not just dusty things, Mama. It's about me. It says he sees his eyes in me. Who is James?" "Not George, Mama. Who is James?" Lily pressed, the steel in her voice surprising even herself. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes wide and wet, and she just shook her head, a pathetic, desperate movement. "Oh, Lily, please, don't go digging up bones that George buried so deep. He loved you, child. That's all that matters. He loved you, and you are his daughter, right and proper," she choked out, tears finally spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. But she didn't deny the letter. She only pleaded for the silence to return, confirming everything Lily feared. The denial was in the omission, in the plea to remember George's love instead of denying James's involvement. That Sunday service was the hardest thing Lily had ever sat through, harder even than George's funeral, because now she knew the preacher was wearing a mask, and the whole congregation was blind to the man beneath the cloth. Reverend James stood taller than any man in Harmony Creek, his silver hair catching the light just so, making him look like an angel carved from local marble. He was giving a sermon on the steadfast rock of faith, his voice a deep, reassuring rumble that always made folks feel safe and forgiven. But to Lily, every word now sounded like a hollow drumbeat, a performance meant to keep the curtain drawn over his own private failings. She studied his face, looking for the eyes mentioned in the letter, and a cold dread settled in her stomach. They were the same. The shape, the faint crinkling at the corners when he smiled that pious public smile. They were startlingly, unmistakably her own. It was a mirror held up in the middle of a church, reflecting a truth that could send shockwaves through the very foundation of the small town. Every time he moved his hands, every time he tilted his head to emphasize a point about commitment and fidelity, Lily saw not the man of God, but the young man who wrote that desperate, loving note to her mother. The hypocrisy was a suffocating shroud, and she felt a powerful urge to stand up, right there in the third pew, and shout the truth to the rafters, to rip the mask off the face of the town's hero. But she didn't. She sat quiet, observing Martha, the pastor's wife, who sat serene and straight-backed in the front row, looking up at her husband with an almost painful adoration. Lily thought about Martha's fragile, unsuspecting faith, and the words died in her throat, strangled by a sudden, protective compassion for the other woman who had also been built a life on James's deceit. The next few days, Lily began her investigation Southern style. That meant visiting the oldest, nosiest person in town, Miss Edna, who knew everything and wasn't afraid to talk about it, especially if you brought her a pecan pie. Lily didn't ask direct questions. That wasn't the way you got the truth in Harmony Creek. Instead, she asked about the old days, about when George and Sarah were courting, and if Reverend James had been in town long. Miss Edna, with her sharp eyes and even sharper memory, didn't disappoint. She launched into a long, rambling story, full of the kind of detail only an old busybody could retain. Oh, George and Sarah. Bless their hearts, they were sweet. But Sarah was a wildflower back then, all spirit and fire, and George was always a bit of a steady oak, you know? She needed a spark, and he was a comfort. And James? Reverend James came to the seminary right down the road a year or two before they married. He was a handsome young man. Lily, I tell you, all fire and brimstone in the pulpit and quiet charm out of it. Sarah, she used to sing in the choir, and James, he would watch her when she wasn't looking. It was the kind of look that made a woman feel seen, you know? The kind of look a husband ought to give. But George, he was too busy building their house to look much at all. Miss Edna paused, sipped her tea, and looked Lily square in the eye, that old Southern instinct for gossip taking over. Folks talked a little then about Sarah and James. Just whispers, mind you. But Sarah got married right quick after that talk started, and the Reverend, well, he got his call to this very church not 6 months later. It was all tidy, all quiet, like the past got swept under the church rug. But honey, I always say, there ain't a rug big enough to hide all the sins of a small town. The information was like pieces of a broken plate, sharp and disjointed, but Lily was starting to see the shape of the whole thing. A forbidden, passionate affair, and a shotgun wedding meant to quiet the scandal and protect the rising career of a powerful young preacher. Lily went back to Miss Edna's words, turning them over and over in her mind. Sarah was a wildflower. James would watch her. Folks talked a little. It painted a picture of a youthful Sarah, not the nervous, quiet woman she knew, and a Reverend James who was still just James. A handsome, ambitious young man, maybe a little too passionate for the cloth he wore. Miss Edna, with her keen memory, had confirmed the timeline. James arrived, Sarah was noticed, whispers started, Sarah married George quickly, and James received his posting. It was the perfect cover-up, the kind of solution that only a small, fiercely proud, and deeply religious community could contrive. The town had helped bury the truth, not with dirt, but with piety and tradition. Lily realized the depth of the sacrifice George had made. He hadn't just married a girl. He had taken on the Reverend's secret, giving his name and his unconditional love to a child that wasn't his, all to ensure Sarah's respectability and James's calling. That kind of selfless love was bigger than any blood tie, and it made the current deception even more painful. George had carried this heavy, crushing knowledge, protecting the secrets of a man who ultimately stole his family's truth. But in doing so, George had given Lily an honest, stable life. Lily now understood why her mother would not speak the truth, not just because of the scandal, but because she was protecting George's memory and his immense, quiet sacrifice. The conflict wasn't just between Lily and her two fathers. It was between the love of a good, quiet man and the destructive passion of a prominent man. It was a choice between honoring a lie that brought peace or shouting a truth that brought chaos. The mounting tension became too much to bear, and Lily decided the time for subtle research was over. She needed to look the man in the eyes and see if the lie would crack. She called the church office and, with a voice carefully pitched to sound professional and innocent, requested a meeting with Reverend James to discuss George's generous and complicated. She emphasized complicated affairs. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon, a quiet time when the church was empty, and the air was still, thick with the scent of old wood and beeswax. Lily walked into his office, and the sight of him sitting behind his large mahogany desk, surrounded by leather-bound Bibles and theological books, was intimidating. He rose to greet her, his hand extended, and his touch was warm, too warm, the touch of a man who had held her as a baby, perhaps. "Lily, bless your heart, it's good of you to come. Your George was a fine man, a true pillar of the community," he said, his voice as smooth as river stone. Lily sat down and kept her gaze steady, right on those familiar eyes. She talked about George's life insurance, mentioning how he had left specific instructions that suggested he had a great deal weighing on his conscience. She watched James's face flicker, a quick, almost imperceptible closing of the eyes, a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. "A good man often feels the weight of the world, Lily," he replied, but the smoothness was gone, replaced by a slightly strained, hollow tone. Then, Lily leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, right over his desk, and she changed the subject. "Reverend, when I was cleaning George's things, I found some very old papers. I wonder if you might remember my mama, Sarah, from way back, when she sang in the choir." The papers mentioned a James, meeting her down by the creek. The room went dead silent. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, and the air grew thick and heavy, like molasses. The silence stretched out between them, long and terrible, the kind of quiet that speaks volumes in a southern parlor. Reverend James didn't move. He didn't deny it, didn't ask what papers, or which James. He simply sat there, his shoulders stiff, the picture of a man who'd just been struck by lightning. His eyes, her eyes, looked down at his folded hands, and he cleared his throat, a small, choked sound. Lily saw the mask starting to crumble, the saintly facade cracking under the weight of 30 years of deception. He was a good actor, but Lily had the script. "Lily, child," he finally managed, his voice now gravelly and weak, a stark contrast to his powerful Sunday preaching. The past is a complicated, confusing place. Your mother and I were young. We shared a faith, a deep connection, before my calling was clear, before she married George. We walked a fine line, Lily, a very fine line." He was admitting to the emotional affair, perhaps even the physical one, but he wasn't confirming her paternity, not yet. He was circling the truth, just as the tension was at its peak, and Lily thought he might finally confess everything. The door cracked open, and the sight of Martha, Reverend James's wife, standing hesitantly in the doorway, stopped the truth cold. Martha was a delicate thing, all soft edges and faded lace, the picture of a perfect, long-suffering pastor's wife, and she carried a small tray with 2 cups of tea. Her eyes, though, were sharp, and they darted quickly from James's bowed head to Lily's tense posture, lingering for a moment on the faint tear on the desk. "Oh, forgive me, James dear. I didn't mean to interrupt your counsel," Martha said, her voice thin as tissue paper. "I just thought Miss Lily might appreciate some refreshment. It's a sad time, dealing with George's affairs." Lily watched the pastor's sudden, dramatic recovery, the way he straightened his collar and wiped the tear away with the back of his hand, transforming instantly back into the pillar of the church. "Thank you, Martha, my love. Lily and I are just concluding our discussion of George's legacy. A truly blessed man," he said, the lie already sliding smoothly back into place. Lily realized that Martha was not just the collateral damage of this secret. She was the very reason the secret had to remain buried. The poor woman looked like a strong gust of wind might shatter her, and the thought of her discovering this betrayal, after a lifetime of dedicated service to her husband and the church, was unbearable. Martha was the innocent in this tangled web, and Lily suddenly felt a sharp, confusing guilt. Her pursuit of the truth was now directly threatening another woman's entire existence, and she paused, the final words of accusation dying on her tongue, swallowed by the simple, heartbreaking presence of Martha. She realized the cost of the truth might be higher than any of them could afford. That evening, Lily returned home, the tea Martha had served still sitting heavy and cold in her stomach. She went straight back to George's box, feeling a desperate need to find more, to find something that could justify the pain and the lies. She reached into the lining of the box, feeling for any small pocket or tear, and her fingers found another piece of paper, folded so tightly it was practically a sliver of wood. This note was older, written on church stationery that had yellowed with age, and it was signed only with the initial J. It was a passionate, unguarded declaration, not about eyes, but about a heart divided. I can't bear this waiting. Marrying her will break my soul, but Father says I have no choice. The calling demands stability. But you, my Sarah, you are my real life, my joy. No matter what happens, you must know that you carry my hope, my true legacy, and I will always find a way to watch over you both. The note was dated 9 months before Lily was born. 9 months. The timing was undeniable. A brutal confirmation that left no room for doubt or polite interpretations of youthful indiscretion. Reverend James hadn't just been courting Sarah. He had loved her passionately, only to abandon her for the sake of his ambition, leaving George to clean up the mess and give her daughter a name. The word legacy echoed in Lily's mind, a terrible irony. His true legacy wasn't the church he built, but the beautiful, complicated life he refused to claim, left in the care of a better, kinder man.